This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Real Estate Podcast, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Of course, we are back at it again with the one and only Marco Permunian, attorney from Italian Real Estate Lawyers. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Today, we wanted to get into the subject of how long does it take to buy a home in Italy. This is something that we've talked about a lot regarding at least the process itself, but how long does that process take? So, Marco, let's just get into things starting from A and work all the way to Z, and the first part of the process during that research phase. Of course, this can take longer for some people, shorter for others. But when you guys are working with your clients, what is like kind of a normal time frame that you guys go through to go from that A to Z point?
Because a good part of our audience is in America, I believe we can make a comparison between Italy and America. And the market in America is probably a little bit faster than the market in Italy. So when a property is for sale in America, right now, I want to say it stays on sale for a shorter period of time than a property in Italy would stay on the market. So I think it's easier to purchase a property in Italy or to research a property in Italy because the options that you find will be there for maybe a few weeks. So you have the time to think about the property, to see other properties and compare properties. Of course, it depends on the area. There are some areas where the real estate market is very fast, so properties are sold extremely fast. But there are some other areas in Italy, especially the rural parts of Italy, maybe in central Italy or southern Italy, where properties do stay on the market for a while. So you have the ability to think about what you want, to see them, to plan your trip to Italy, to go see them. So in general, I believe it's a little bit slower market.
Yeah, no, I've heard about that before. I mean, I've heard that it can be on the kind of almost extreme ends. I mean, I know of some people in Milan that were looking there, like you mentioned, like some places can go pretty fast, and a city like Milan, things can really happen very rapidly. It's not a good representation of the rest of the nation. But then even where you are in Rovigo, if I'm not mistaken, things can also take a good amount of time that you can feel comfortable and not feel like you're rushed, that you have to jump on it immediately. Even I know friends from America that would be in places that might be equivalent to Rovigo, the places where your offices are, and maybe they would get they would only have a matter of hours or days to make this decision if it was the right one for them.
Yeah, I think in Italy you go from, having just a few days in places like Lake Garda, where a lot of people from Germany are buying properties with a lake view, so villas with a lake view that are just stay on the market maybe for a week. Two places in central Italy, in the rural parts of Italy, where you can find properties that have been on the market for maybe 2-3 years. So it kind of depends on where you're looking for to buy a property. But in general, the market is a little bit slower, not everywhere in Italy. Once again, only in certain areas. And that's also why, prices are maybe very high in some very hot areas and lower, or maybe there is room for negotiations in some other areas where, like in central Italy or southern Italy, where the market is maybe a little bit slower.
That makes sense. And so I guess having talked about that first initial aspect, what about actually jumping in and saying, all right, I found the place that I like, I'm ready to move forward? Like we've talked about those steps in the past, but maybe just to quickly recap, what are the steps and how long does each one of them take? Like making the offer, talking to your agent, and all of those bits and pieces in between.
So again, the process of purchasing a property in Italy is normally slower than the process in America, just because the Italian legal system it's a very old system. But if on one end it's a slower process than the process in America, it gives a lot of guarantees. So it is low because it's a process that allow the person that goes through the process to be sure that you can't, like, nothing can go wrong in the process, because there are public officials that need to take part in the process necessarily by law that will guarantee that you become the legitimate owner of the property. So in America, the process of buying a property, for example, involves maybe lawyers, maybe not even necessarily lawyers. In Italy, you have to purchase a property before a public notary who is a public official and who will basically certify the real estate transaction and certify that the property has no limitations, that we will become the legitimate owner of the property in full, that there are no liens and no other limitations. So if it's slower on one side, it comes with many more guarantees on the other side. But let's start from the very first step, the formal offer. So normally, the very first step in a real estate acquisition in Italy is submitting a formal offer to the seller, which is submitted in the form of a signed document, which basically outlines what you're buying, the price. So it will identify the property, it will identify the amount that you're willing to pay for the property, and a term, like an amount of time by which the offer must be accepted by the seller. Otherwise, it will basically lose its effects. This document that you normally sign, and it's called formal offer, is normally provided by a real estate agent if there is a real estate agent involved in the transaction. So they have these templates that they use, and that you can basically only put the information related to the property that you're buying and you sign. And once again, there will be a time frame, so basically a deadline before which the seller has to accept or deny. Normally that time frame is between 7 and 15 days. Now, if the seller doesn't say anything in that time frame, so doesn't respond to your formal offer, it means that your offer was not accepted. Otherwise, normally you will hear from the agent or from your lawyer if you're using a lawyer, or us if you're using us, that the offer has been accepted. So now you have formally entered into a contract which will basically lead to the purchase of your property.
And so this is one of the guarantees that you were kind of talking about, the protections that's part of this process, is that if you make this offer, then you've started entering into this agreement. And if you decide to pull out from that point, then there are certain things that you may want to keep in mind. But once you've gone through and you've had this period of, say, 7 to 15 days, then we're talking about also the search time on top. So let's say maybe you spent a couple of weeks there. We're talking maybe 3 weeks at this point, 2 weeks, week and a half, whatever it is. Maybe you jump right off the plane and you've already got the perfect place lined up for you. Or maybe you haven't even come to Italy and you're working with Italian real estate lawyers, and they've selected and shown you these places that would be the most appropriate ones for you, and you don't even have to go through that. So what would the next step in the process be from there, and how long would this take to get rolling?
So since you mentioned the guarantees and assurances, what happens is, in some cases, this formal offer, which is marked as accepted, already constitutes a preliminary agreement. In some other cases, there is a subsequent agreement that the seller and the buyer enter into. But the point is, once you have entered into this preliminary agreement, which is either the next step after the offer is accepted, or the actual offer marked as accepted constitutes a preliminary agreement. Well, once you enter into a preliminary agreement, what happens is, if the seller backs off, then the seller has to repay you the double of the deposit that you paid. Because what happens is, when you enter into preliminary agreement, you normally pay a certain amount of money, which constitutes a security deposit, which is normally a 10 or 30% of the value of the property. But then if the seller backs out, then the seller has to pay you back the double of the security deposit that was received. If, on the other hand, if the buyer doesn't want to continue anymore in the process, then the buyer will lose the security deposit that was paid. So that's the very first guarantee that you get in the process. Once you enter into the preliminary agreement, there is an amount of money that is exchanged, which is lost or paid back twice in the case either party backs off the deal. But going back to the timeline, what happens after you enter into the preliminary agreement? Well, the process can be very fast from there and can take just a couple of weeks if you are buying a property that doesn't need due diligence and if you're paying in cash. Or it could be a rather longish process if you need to obtain a mortgage or a loan to secure the property and if you have to do your due diligence. So depending on the needs of the parties, they will set a timeline which could be shorter or longer depending on their needs to enter into the final agreement, which needs to be signed before a public notary. But how long does it actually take from the preliminary agreement to the final agreement that is signed before the public notary? Well, it could be only 15 days, for example, if you're paying in cash and don't need a loan, and if the property is empty. Or it could take as long as 2 or 3 months if you have to obtain a mortgage, if the owner, for example, has to move out from the property. Or, for example, if the seller has to fix the floor plan, the legal document that is filed in the municipal offices. It happens sometimes that during the negotiations or maybe during the due diligence, it comes out the floor plan needs to be fixed because a wall was built and the municipal offices were never informed. So it depends on the specific case, and you have to be sure to discuss this with the owner. If you want a very quick transaction to happen, you have to be sure to discuss all of these things with the owner, with the seller, to make sure that there will be no hiccups and that the process can go on smoothly, especially if you are a cash payer. If you are somebody who needs a mortgage and needs more time, maybe it will be in your interest to make the process a little bit longer so you can have the time to obtain the loan. And in this case, the owner and the seller needs to agree to that. So the final answer is it depends on the party's needs.
Mm-hmm. So really, I guess maybe to kind of sum things up, on the quick side, the very quick side, theoretically, from the time that you find the home all the way until you're actually in the home, could be a matter of maybe a few weeks on the quick side, but that would be, of course, very quick. But it, of course, could take more than that, maybe up to, say, a couple of months, I would assume, from what you were saying. Does that sound roughly correct?
That's correct.
Well, fantastic. And I think this episode is definitely going to shed some light on this process, a little bit more light, because we've been blaring the sun on this process for a while. But of course, Marco, if anybody is interested in your help to shed more light on this process and for the help to get their perfect home in Italy, how can they contact you and your team at Italian Real Estate Lawyers?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or give us a call. The number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more content like this about moving to Italy, purchasing property in Italy, and finding out more about how to make these things happen, and of course, you can check out the series that we've done on what different areas of Italy that you can actually find that might be right for you. Be sure that you are subscribed to this channel for more content like this, as well as being subscribed to the Italian Citizenship Podcast, finding more out about the legal aspects of moving to Italy. Of course, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube as well as your favorite podcasting player of choice so that you can make sure that you catch us wherever you want, whenever you need. So thank you again, Marco, for making yourself available for this episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast. Of course, I'm Rafael Di Furia. And of course, this episode has been made possible by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.